Every morning the young man woke before the city came alive, slipping into his worn shirt and faded trousers, combing his hair with quick strokes, and stepping out into the cold air with heavy steps. His car stood waiting in the driveway, an old rusted machine that had once been proud but now rattled like an empty tin. Its paint was chipped, its tires bald, and when the engine started, it coughed out thick smoke like a sick animal. Neighbors often looked at it with pity or smirks, shaking their heads as if the car's weakness reflected the weakness of its owner. But the young man never argued, never explained. He placed his hands on the steering wheel, whispered a quiet prayer, and began the slow drive toward the office. Each street was a struggle. The car groaned at every turn, the gears grinding like bones against stone. Sometimes it stopped in the middle of the road, forcing him to climb out and push, his back straining, his palms sweaty, while horns blared behind him. Drivers shouted insults, some laughed, some cursed, but he ignored them all. He would wipe the sweat from his brow, climb back inside, and continue the journey with eyes fixed ahead. Inside his chest burned the same fire every day, shame pressing from outside, determination burning from within. One morning, when the air was thick with fog and the streets alive with the rush of workers heading to their jobs, his car broke down again, this time right in front of the office building. Smoke hissed from under the hood, steam rising like a flag of defeat. He stepped out quickly, rolling up his sleeves, trying to push the car into the parking lot before too many eyes saw. But fate was cruel. A group of coworkers stood near the entrance, sipping coffee, chatting idly, waiting for the day to start. Among them was a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, one who loved to mock others to make herself feel taller. She spotted him struggling, his hands on the wheel, his back bent as he pushed the dead machine inch by inch toward the lot. She laughed loudly, the kind of laugh meant not just for herself but to invite everyone else to join. "Look at him," she said, pointing with her manicured finger. "Our big office man arrives in a garbage truck. Or is it even a truck? Maybe just scrap metal rolling on wheels." The coworkers turned, some chuckled, some burst into open laughter. One of them added, "Careful, don't breathe too close, the smoke might poison you." Another said, "How does he even afford gas for that thing? It must drink more fuel than it moves." Their laughter echoed in the morning air, bouncing against the office walls, louder than the noise of traffic, sharper than any blade. The young man kept pushing, his jaw tight, his eyes burning, but not with tears. His heart hammered in his chest, every laugh striking it like a nail, every insult pressing heavier than the car itself. The woman walked closer, her heels clicking against the pavement, her smirk wide and cruel. "Why don't you sell this junk and buy a real car?" she said loud enough for all to hear. "Oh wait, I forgot. You can't afford it. Poor, useless, unworthy. That's what you are." The words stung not because they were true but because they were spoken with such pride, as if she enjoyed crushing someone already struggling. The co-workers laughed harder, sipping their coffee, shaking their heads in mock sympathy, enjoying the show. For them it was entertainment. For him it was humiliation. But he did not shout back, he did not beg, he did not even look at them. He pushed the car until it rolled into its spot, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and stood tall. His silence cut deeper than any words he could have spoken. He looked at them once, his eyes steady, and though his lips did not move, his gaze spoke louder than their laughter. Inside those eyes was fire, a fire not of shame but of revenge, not of weakness but of promise. It was the fire of a man who would not forget, who would not forgive, who would one day return stronger than they could imagine. The laughter slowly faded when they saw his face, for something in his expression made them uneasy. The woman scoffed, tossing her hair back, pretending not to notice the chill in his eyes, but deep inside a small thread of fear tugged at her heart. He walked into the office without a word, the sound of their laughter still echoing behind him, but his steps were steady, his back straight. He did not slump like a defeated man. He carried himself like someone who had seen the bottom and had already decided to climb higher. Throughout the day whispers followed him, co-workers smirking, sharing jokes about the smoke machine in the parking lot. Even during meetings, he caught the flicker of amusement in their eyes when they looked at him, and the woman never missed a chance to remind him of his place. "Careful," she said once in the cafeteria. "Don't park too close to me. I don't want my car catching your rust." The table laughed again, but this time he only sipped his tea calmly, his silence heavier than words. Every humiliation became fuel. Every laugh was a spark. Every insult was a stone in the foundation of something greater. He went home that night, parked the car quietly in the corner of his small yard, and sat on the steps in silence. The city lights flickered in the distance, voices of neighbors drifted through the air, but all he could hear was her laughter, her words calling him poor, useless, unworthy. His fists tightened on his knees, his teeth clenched, but instead of rage exploding outward, it sank inward, becoming a seed of resolve. He whispered into the night, "One day you will choke on those words. One day you will beg, and I will not forget this moment." The broken car sat beside him, silent, rusted, wounded like its owner. But just as he believed the car still had enough strength to keep moving, he believed he had enough strength to rise, no matter how much the world mocked him. The next morning, he drove the same broken car to work again. The engine rattled, the smoke rose, and the laughter returned, but he did not care. Each day was another reminder of where he stood and where he would go. Each day was another page in the story he was writing in silence. The woman and her friends believed he was stuck, believed he would always be the man with the broken car. They did not know that he was already building something far stronger than they could ever see. His silence was his shield, his humiliation was his weapon, and his fire was his future. The broken car rattled every morning as the young man drove it to the office, smoke trailing behind like a flag of shame, and every morning the same people laughed, pointing at him as if his car was a joke and his life a failure. The woman who had mocked him first became the loudest voice in that crowd. Always smirking, always making sharp comments, always making sure others noticed his weakness. To everyone else he was nothing more than a poor worker with no future, a man who would always live in the shadow of others' laughter. But what they could not see was that behind his silence a storm was growing, a storm he never showed on his face but carried in his heart. When the day's work ended and the office lights went dark, he did not go home to sleep like the others. He went to the docks to lift crates, to the factories to sweep floors, to construction sites where his hands grew rougher with every brick he carried. He worked late into the night, his body aching, his shirt soaked with sweat, his eyes burning with exhaustion, but his spirit refused to bend. Every coin he earned from those extra jobs he placed carefully into a small wooden box under his bed. He did not spend it on clothes. He did not spend it on food beyond the basics. He saved with the patience of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment. At night, when his body screamed for rest, he lit a small lamp and opened borrowed books, studying until dawn. He taught himself about business, about investments, about contracts and strategies, filling his mind with knowledge that no one around him imagined he could hold. While his co-workers mocked his broken car, he was building an engine of another kind, an engine of skill, patience, and vision that would one day carry him farther than any luxury vehicle could. His father sometimes looked at him with worry, asking why he pushed himself so hard, why he carried so many burdens at once, but he would only answer softly, because one day, this struggle will be worth it. His mother quietly left food by his side as he studied, her heart breaking to see her son so tired, but she did not stop him, because she saw the fire in his eyes. In the office, things grew worse. The woman made sure his name was whispered with pity and scorn. The man with the smoke machine, they called him. Whenever he parked, people pretended to cover their noses, laughing as if his very presence was a joke. Yet he did not shout back, he did not defend himself. He smiled faintly, walked past them, and let their words turn into weapons he would one day use. His silence made them believe he was weak, but in truth his silence was armor, hiding the sharp edge of his growing strength. Months passed like this. His body grew stronger, his savings box heavier, his knowledge deeper. And though on the outside nothing seemed to change, the same old car, the same mocking co-workers, on the inside everything was shifting. He had learned the art of patience, the skill of endurance, and the vision of a man who knew exactly where he was going. His co-workers only saw his struggle, but he saw their blindness. They were too busy laughing to notice how carefully he was building the foundation of something great. He was no longer just a man with a broken car. He was a man sharpening his soul, turning every insult, every laugh, every night of hunger into fuel. And when the right time came, when his patience had ripened into power, those who mocked him would not just see his success, they would bow to it. For now, he stayed in silence, working, waiting, preparing, because he knew revenge was not taken in haste. It was taken with precision, at the moment when it cut the deepest. The months of silent struggle turned into years, and slowly the young man's savings grew, the small wooden box under his bed now too full to close properly. Every coin in it was a memory of sweat. Every note inside it was a scar of humiliation turned into strength. He knew the time had come to take the first step, to turn silence into action. People still laughed at him every morning when his broken car rattled into the office lot, still mocked when he climbed out wiping grease from his hands, still whispered that he would never become more than a poor man driving junk, but he carried their laughter like stones in a wall he was building. He had studied enough, learned enough, and saved enough to begin. His eyes were no longer the eyes of the man they once humiliated. They were the eyes of someone who had chosen patience over pride, and now patience was ready to reward him. His first move was small, almost invisible to the world, but to him it was the foundation of everything. He invested in a small delivery service, a business most people ignored because it seemed unimportant, but he saw opportunity. Where others were careless, he was careful. He used every coin wisely, buying second-hand vehicles, hiring drivers who were honest but jobless, men who, like him, had been mocked and rejected. Together they worked day and night, carrying packages across the city, delivering goods faster and cheaper than anyone else. Customers noticed, and slowly trust began to grow. Profits trickled in, then grew larger. The young man reinvested every bit of money, buying more vehicles, expanding routes, creating a system that was simple but effective. Weeks turned into months, and soon his company was no longer just a small service in a forgotten corner. It was becoming a name people mentioned when they spoke about reliable work. Inside the office where he still worked for his old boss, whispers began to spread. Some employees had heard of the new delivery company that was stealing clients from established names. No one suspected the quiet man with the broken car sitting among them could be behind it. Even the woman who mocked him the most continued to laugh, saying, "These little businesses never last, just like his old car, they'll collapse soon." He never replied, only smiled faintly, because he knew the truth. His business was not collapsing, it was rising. Each night he returned home, exhausted but satisfied, his hands covered in both dirt and ink, dirt from helping his drivers, ink from signing new contracts. His mother watched him with pride, his father's weak eyes filled with hope again. They could see he was no longer just surviving, he was building. Still, he told no one at work. Let them laugh, let them point. Every insult was a reminder of why he worked harder, why he stayed quiet. One evening, as he sat in his small office reviewing papers, he saw the numbers clearly. His profits had tripled, his reach had spread across the city. This was no longer survival. This was success. The first spark had caught fire. He leaned back in his chair, eyes burning with the same fire he had carried since that day of mockery on the road, and whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." The next morning, when his broken car rattled again into the office lot and the woman laughed as usual, calling out jokes about his smoke machine, he smiled silently. She did not know that the man she mocked for his car now owned more vehicles than she could ever dream of, that the poor worker she ridiculed now signed contracts worth more than her salary. He kept his silence, because the sweetest revenge was not in shouting. It was in waiting until the world revealed the truth for him. The city's business world was slowly changing, and most people did not notice it until it was too late. In the beginning, the young man's company was only a whisper, a name few had heard, a service people used because it was cheap and fast. But over time, that whisper grew louder. His delivery trucks were seen everywhere, his workers wore neat uniforms, his offices began to open in new districts, and contracts that once belonged to older companies quietly slipped into his hands. The office where he still worked began to feel different too. Clients who had once been proud partners of his boss's company now complained of delays, of poor service, of arrogance from the management. Meanwhile, those same clients began praising a new competitor, a company that seemed to rise from nowhere. Nobody knew its true owner, but everyone could see its results. Inside the office cafeteria, whispers spread. Some employees wondered aloud if this mysterious company would soon overtake them. The woman who always mocked the young man laughed the loudest, waving her manicured hand and saying, "Oh, these new businesses are like his broken car. They make noise, they look funny, and soon they collapse on the road." Her friends laughed with her, their eyes glancing at him, waiting for a reaction. But as always, he stayed silent, only giving a small smile before walking away. Inside his chest, however, his fire burned brighter. They still saw him as the same man, but in truth the balance of power had already begun to shift. Every morning his old car rattled into the parking lot, and she mocked, but outside of that lot, his company cars, new, clean, shining, delivered goods across the city. The same people who laughed at him in the office unknowingly ordered through his services at home, praised his workers on the street, and depended on his growing network. Slowly, his company was not just competing with his boss's empire. It was taking bites out of it, pulling away one client after another. The boss noticed the losses but dismissed them at first, calling them temporary, blaming lazy staff, never suspecting that the quiet worker he had ignored for years was the man behind it. Contracts were cancelled, deals slipped away, but arrogance blinded him. He shouted louder, insulted more, fired innocent workers to show his authority. But nothing stopped the slow bleeding of his company. Every step he took in anger only made things worse, driving more employees away and pushing more clients into the arms of the mysterious competitor. At night, the young man sat in his small office, going through reports, watching numbers climb higher. His managers, loyal men he had hired with respect and dignity, worked with full hearts because they trusted him. His company grew like a silent storm, spreading through the city not with noise but with consistency, reliability, and honesty. The shift in power was no longer hidden. It was becoming clear. Even the woman who mocked him began to notice. Her voice lost some of its laughter. Her smirk grew weaker. She heard the whispers too, that the new company was powerful, that it was winning contracts her boss once boasted about. One afternoon, she overheard two managers whispering in panic about a huge client who had left for the competitor, and for the first time she felt fear. Still, when she saw him, she forced herself to laugh, mocking his car again. But in her heart the laughter sounded hollow. The young man stayed silent, his patience steady. He knew the time for truth had not yet come. But he also knew the day was near when silence would no longer be needed, when his revenge would not just be in his success but in their realization of who he truly was. The shift in power was already complete. They just had not seen it yet. The office that once echoed with arrogance now stood in silence and fear. The boss, who used to laugh loudly and shout at his workers, now sat in meetings with sweat on his forehead, unable to explain why contracts were vanishing one after another. Investors were angry, managers confused, employees restless. The woman who once mocked the young man with cruel words now whispered with her friends about the company's future, her voice no longer filled with laughter but with worry. Every day new rumors spread, clients leaving, losses growing, the empire collapsing. At the same time, the mysterious competitor's name grew louder in the city. Everyone was talking about it, praising its speed, its honesty, its power. Trucks carrying its logo moved through the streets, advertisements appeared on boards, and workers spoke of fair wages and respect under its leadership. People admired the company but no one knew the man behind it. No one guessed it was the same worker who still parked his broken car in the lot of the failing office. But the truth was about to break. 1 week after the shift in power had become too obvious to hide, the final blow landed. The competitor, the young man's company, signed the biggest client the boss had ever owned. It was the contract that fed most of his empire, the deal that gave him pride, the one he had always bragged about. Losing it was like losing his crown. The news spread through the office like fire, leaving everyone stunned. The boss locked himself in his office, his managers shouted at each other, and the workers stood in groups whispering. The woman's face turned pale as she listened. For the first time she felt the ground slipping beneath her, and fear pressed down harder than pride. That same afternoon, the office was called into a meeting. The boss was desperate to explain, but before he could, the doors opened. A group of men in suits walked in, their steps firm, their presence strong. And at the center of them was the young man, dressed sharply, his eyes calm, his silence heavy. Gasps filled the room. Some workers blinked in disbelief, some whispered his name with shock, and the woman's mouth fell open as if her voice had been stolen. The young man walked to the head of the table, his step steady, and placed documents on the desk. His words were quiet, but they cut like a blade. This office once laughed at me when my car broke down outside these doors. Some of you called me poor, useless, unworthy. But today I walk in not as your coworker, not as your servant, but as the owner of the company that now owns you. The silence that followed was louder than any laughter had ever been. The boss's face drained of color, his pride shattered in front of everyone. The managers stared at the papers showing the transfer of contracts, the new ownership, the reality they could not deny. The woman who mocked him most could not breathe. Her hands trembled, her smirk gone forever, her voice shaking as she whispered, "It was you, all along." She stepped forward, her arrogance gone, her eyes begging as if she could erase the past with one look. "Please," she said softly, "please give me a chance. I didn't mean those words. I didn't know who you were." The workers who once laughed now lowered their eyes in shame, their silence a confession of guilt. The tables had turned completely. The same people who mocked him now stood at the door of his success, begging for mercy, begging for a place beside him. The young man did not shout, he did not gloat, he did not insult. His revenge was not in mocking them back. It was in the calmness of his power, in the silence that reminded them of every laugh they once threw at him. He looked at the woman for a long moment, his eyes steady, his voice cold but measured. "You mocked me when I was weak. Now you beg me when I am strong. Remember this moment. This is your lesson." He turned away, leaving her standing in shame, her pride broken, her words swallowed by silence. The woman stood frozen, her proud smile gone forever, her voice trembling as she begged for mercy, but the young man did not waste another glance at her. He sat at the head of the long table, the same kind of table where he had once been humiliated, mocked, and ignored. Now the entire office was silent, managers afraid to breathe, workers staring at him with wide eyes, their faces pale with shame. Years ago he had walked into this building with nothing but hope, and years ago he had walked out with nothing but humiliation. Today he had returned with power in his hands and silence as his weapon. The boss finally found his voice, but it was weak, broken, nothing like the booming arrogance he once carried. "This cannot be real," he stammered, his hands shaking. "This company is mine, my empire, my pride. You can't take it." The young man leaned forward, his eyes sharp, his words calm but heavy. "You took my dignity in front of everyone. You laughed when I was weak. You mocked me for things you never understood. But you forgot something important. Power does not stay forever with arrogance. It belongs to patience. It belongs to hard work. It belongs to those who endure. And now everything you built with cruelty belongs to me." The papers were signed, the contract sealed, and no one in the room could deny it. Investors nodded in silence, managers lowered their heads, and even the boss realized that his throne had been ripped away. The woman tried again, stepping closer, her voice almost a whisper. "Please, I was wrong. I see it now. You are powerful. You are successful. I never should have said those words." Her eyes filled with tears, her pride crushed under the weight of her desperation. The young man turned his gaze to her, his face calm, his eyes unreadable. For a moment it seemed he might answer, but instead he stood up slowly, his silence speaking louder than any words. He walked past her, his step steady, leaving her standing with her shame. She had mocked his broken car, laughed at his struggle, and now she stood begging at the door of his company, powerless and humiliated. Outside the building, the sunlight shone on a sight that made the entire city stop and stare. A brand new luxury car gleamed in the parking lot, its engine smooth, its design sharp, its logo bright. On the side of the car was the emblem of his company, the company that had risen from his pain, his sweat, his fire. Workers who once mocked him now watched in silence as he opened the door, sat inside, and drove away without a word. The same lot where laughter once rang out now echoed only with their regret. In the weeks that followed, the company flourished under his leadership. He rebuilt it not with arrogance but with fairness. Employees were treated with respect, clients trusted him more than ever, and the business grew stronger every day. The old boss disappeared into the shadows, his name no longer spoken with power, only with pity. The woman avoided the stares of others, her laughter gone, her voice quiet, her pride broken. She had once mocked him for being poor, for driving a broken car, but now she could not even look at him without remembering the silence of her defeat. The young man never gloated, never mocked them back, because he did not need to. His success was the loudest answer. His silence was the sharpest revenge. He had turned humiliation into victory, weakness into strength, shame into power. And as he drove through the city in his shining car, his company's name on every billboard and truck, he whispered only to himself, "They laughed at me once, but now the world knows who I am." Revenge is complete.